Is this
no.
the title?
Yeah, maybe. Yep.
There it is.
Actually, I probably need mine on mute.
Okay.
Should be on here. If someone's watching this video, go ahead and comment with whether you can hear us or not.
They can't hear us. They're not.
Well, I know if they can't hear us, they're not going to comment. But all right, Stephanie says that we can be heard.
Also, I did read the PowerPoint. I made it. We were just very struggling today.
Yeah. The technology has not been our friend as of this moment.
Shocker. We'll get started here in just a second.
Until that time, if you have any untechnically difficulty related questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box or send them as a text to me. Somebody's already said that I can maybe fix things or make things better. I'm not quite sure about that, but we'll give her a try.
Look at that lucky shot.
It's great. I know. Yeah, that should be the right one.
Yep. This is that one. Okay.
Sweet.
I will pull up. Let's see how many. I got 8 watching. We had 13 on the other one. We'll give it a couple, give it a minute, and then we'll get rolling. I'm just going to put this in presentation mode. Technology is so great. God. I don't know what's going on. There we go. Okay.
All right. Well, it looks like we have 11 on. We're going to wait just a couple more minutes since we had to change links to this and make sure that we get everybody on that is hoping to be on. This will be posted in a video format as well. So if you have to bug off early for some reason, don't worry, you'll still get all the information. And you now have my contact information, Elissa's contact information, and Brandon's contact information from the PowerPoint that we sent out previous to this. So you can call or email us if you have further questions.
Lauren's not able to get there.
Did you try that link off of try to open that?
Oh, this one.
Yeah, it should be the same thing, but
Can't use it either. Is there a remove website? What? You literally posted a link.
if you click on that, where does it take you?
This?
Yeah, where does
it takes us to the
webinar.
yeah. Well, we've got 12 on.
Yeah. 11 or 12.
I'll keep playing with this. You can just start and I'll figure it out.
Okay.
Okay. That might be helpful. Thanks for your patience, guys. Technology is just really.
We had everything all lined up, and apparently, once you schedule a go live, it doesn't continue to be scheduled to the point that you can actually access
let you do it, which doesn't make any sense. But we're gonna power through. It's gonna be fine, and we're just gonna go ahead and get started.
So for those of you that don't know, my name is Michael Tupper, and with me tonight is Elissa Russ. We're both past state presidents with Iowa FFA, myself in 2015-16 and Elissa in 2016-17. We're really excited to have you all join us here this evening. Hopefully we can get a few more people on here just in a little bit. But first and foremost, congratulations on getting to this point in the process and in choosing to pursue state office. It's definitely a decision that has to be taken with quite a bit of weight. It's a big responsibility, a big commitment, and going through the process is not an easy one. It's probably one of the more intensive interview processes you'll ever do in your life. And hopefully some of the information that we give you here this afternoon or this evening will be of benefit as you proceed over the next few weeks with your final preparations and then interviewing in Ankeny. If you have questions at any time, we're going to try and, like I said, get more of you on this webinar, hopefully. But if not, we'll have it posted, so we'll open up to questions at any time during the presentation and try and answer them then, and then after the presentation as well, and we'll answer them on a per-person basis. So really, this process is kind of done in like we call 7 steps. So if you're looking at the PowerPoint right now, if you're on page 6 of the PowerPoint or slide 6 of the PowerPoint, you can kind of see that 7-step process where you've already filled out the application, right? So that's already happened. The next step is interviews at the FFA Enrichment Center, where we do the 7 rounds of interviews. We'll talk about those coming up here in just a little bit. Each one of those rounds, what each one of them looks like, and what that kind of means in the grand scheme of how that's scored as well. The third step is the ballot finally being announced at the business session. That's when you'll find out whether you made the ballot for state office or whether you did not make the ballot for state office. From there, if you are selected for the ballot, you'll give a 2-minute candidate speech. You'll also answer 2 questions on stage. Votes are then cast, and the election results are finalized. And finally, step 7, those are results are announced at the final session of State Leadership Conference. Actually, the last thing that happens at state convention here coming up in April. So that's just a really quick overview of what really the next month is going to look like for you all before we dive a little bit deeper into what specifically the interview process looks like. So if you go to slide 7, the next thing is kind of the interview timeline. And that will be on April 18th and 19th, which is a Wednesday and Thursday. Interviews will start at 8:45 a.m. on April 18th. And interviews will end at 12:30 p.m. on April 19th. The attire for that is official dress. We would suggest that if you haven't already done so, if you have a fairly long drive coming in to interviews on Wednesday morning, that 3-4 hours away, or if you just want to make sure that you get a good night's rest, if you're not a morning person, want to make sure that you're closer to Ankeny. I believe there's a block of rooms reserved right now through that Iowa FFA is reserved. Go ahead, if your advisor hasn't, have them contact Scott Johnson, and he can hopefully still get you into that block of rooms so that you don't have to drive really far and get up really early on Wednesday morning before interviews start. So then moving forward from there is kind of the state officer selection process workbook. So that's a workbook. If you haven't already found this resource, that resource is on iowaffa.com. It's under the state officer candidate tab, which is under the state officers tab up at the top. And it's really just kind of your guide to how you want to go about looking at becoming prepared for this process. So it talks about the interview rounds. It talks about resources that are available for you all to do studying from. There are, within that same kind of tab, there's different questions that kind of help evaluate your own personal growth, things that'll kind of get you into the mindset of that behavioral-based interviewing that you'll be doing throughout the process. and it gives you a little bit of perspective from past state officers too about what it really means to be a state officer. So lots of great information there. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly suggest that you go and check it out in order to kind of best prepare yourself for what those 2 days are going to look like.
One other resource that's on the website is the state officer selection process rules. This kind of gives you more of an in-depth look on what happens within the process. So if you're into that stuff, you really want to understand the rounds 100% and be super comfortable with that, that's another great resource just to be familiar with and maybe look over before coming to Ankeny here in a couple weeks.
Yeah. So we already have one question on here. Do we get an official schedule for the interview days?
So Mr. Johnson, the executive secretary of IOFFA, is finalizing a very vague-ish schedule, kind of just to give you an idea of what time the days are going to start and end, what time like rounds are going to start and end, when lunch will be. We won't give you a schedule much far in advance as far as like the minute you'll be entering the interview room, because that's not really necessary. But you'll get there'll be like an overview schedule that's put up online here in a couple days. And then at the interviews, we'll kind of break down the day a little bit deeper as we progress through the interviews, just so you guys are aware of what's going on and know what to expect. I mean, personal growth questions. This is something that is really just what the whole interview process is kind of based off of for the majority of it, with a couple exceptions. These, you can kind of go into more in depth with this stuff. It's kind of like the behavioral based interview questions. If you were at the state officer candidate workshop, we talked about that a lot. If you weren't, all of the notes from that workshop are online on that state officer selection process page on ioffa.com. So go ahead and access that. Basically, the way that we ask questions in the majority of the rounds is to see how you act in certain situations, what your behavior is when you're thrown certain things in life. So that's kind of just the basis of that. If you have questions on what the questions can consist of, or worried about that, shoot it up in the chat and we can definitely hit on that a little bit more. But a great resource to kind of dive into that is that the workshop notes that are online on the association website.
Yeah. So for those of you following along with the PowerPoint, we're now on slide 10. So this kind of talks about the structure of how we like to evaluate state officer candidates. So slide 10 has a circle that in the middle of it says you, and then there's 5 circles that kind of surround that circle with a bunch of different words in it. So those words around the outside are the 5 different what we call competency areas that we will be evaluating you on within these rounds. So communication, how well you're a team player, knowledge, character, and influence are all weighted equally, we like to say. So all of those are weighted at 20% of what your final score is. And definitely the nominating committee at different times throughout the process will be looking for each one of those skills within all of you. And we'll dive into what each one of those skills kind of means here in the next few slides. So communication kind of really revolves around your effective use of a variety of different communication links. So whether that is nonverbal, whether that's your written communication, whether that's your ability to listen, speak to large groups, speak one-on-one, your conversation skills, we have a different set that is evaluated within communication that kind of revolves around anything to do with communication. It's one of the biggest forms of what you'll be doing as a state officer. You'll be communicating with chapter members. You'll be communicating with business and industry partners. You'll be giving speeches. You'll be giving presentations, workshops. So it's definitely one not to take lightly. And it's a really important in trying to convey any of the skills that you possess that you believe will make yourself a good state officer.
Did you mention the 20%?
Yeah, and then if you're looking at the PowerPoint that you have right now, each one of these says 25% at the top. That's a typo from the previous PowerPoint that we had. So those are supposed to read as 20%. We'll send up an updated PowerPoint here after this presentation is done, so that you have all the corrections that we have found.
Math is hard, so sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
Says the engineer.
Yeah. I was kind of wondering why you listed one of the process out of 125%. Okay, we got another question here. Is it okay to give personal stories when answering personal growth questions? So, yes, that's really kind of the purpose of having those questions. So a lot of, stories need to be, appropriate to the context of what is being asked, but the nominating committee wants to know you. So if you have a story from your personal life that kind of exhibits the traits and skills that you have as an individual, absolutely. Those are the stories that you should be telling the nominating committee to answer those questions. So the use of personal stories, I don't know if there's a question I answered that I didn't use a personal story, something from that had happened within my life in order to answer that. So that's really what we mean behind those behavioral based interview answers is providing a story that shows a characteristic. So what happened in your life, how you responded to it, and how does that show that you exhibit a trait? That's kind of what we're talking about with that. So good question.
And don't be afraid to share stories outside of the FFA world. That's a really great way just to show versatility and your involvement in your community and that sort of stuff. But on the same side, like, you're running for FFA state office, so don't be afraid to share FFA stories as well. Just find a good balance of experiences that you've had and how those relate to the competencies that we're talking about. But if you have a question that maybe you don't want to ask on the chat, feel free to text it to Tupper or I. Our phone number is at the very bottom of the PowerPoint, and we'll just answer it. And we don't have a majority of your phone numbers anyway, so if you have one that you're worried about asking in front of everyone, just go ahead and shoot us a text too.
Yeah. So then if we move on to slide 12, that slide 12 is what talks about a team player. So team player is exactly what it says it is. So it's how well do you work within a team? How well do you value kind of other people's ideas when you're working as a team? How do you try and draw people into the fold to make that team work the best, have the best diversity of thought and opinion within whatever group that you're doing? How well do you step up and lead? How well do you allow others to lead when they're most capable of doing so? So it's kind of that big picture, working with a team and kind of working towards the goals of an organization or a group rather than you pursuing your individual goals in whatever it is that you're working on at the time. So, putting your team before yourself, that's something that's extremely important as a state officer. You're going to have goals as a team that are more important than the individual goals that you set along the way. In case you don't know, there's this kind of small thing that you put on in April called State Convention. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. It's a really big event. And it's definitely something that you have to have a lot of teamwork with. And you'll be working with your state officer team all year long to put on events. And if you can't work as a team, things aren't going to go very successfully. Areas of knowledge. So this is the one that kind of you get to show off your ag knowledge, your knowledge on the education system, your knowledge about FFA and agricultural education. Really, the three main areas of knowledge are agriculture, FFA, and then agricultural education. So you think about like the three-circle model, and the three areas that are involved with that, they're the exact same. So whatever skills and knowledge you can demonstrate within those areas are great. Something that's new this year, actually, after the restructure of the different competency areas, where we took it from 8 to 5, part of the knowledge area is also your critical thinking skills, your ability to problem solve, and then critical thinking and problem solving. Those are the other two that kind of round out that category. So that can really revolve around anything. When was a time that you were given a task that you had to think on your feet, when you had to come up with a new idea, that sort of thing. So whatever kind of shows your ability to be a good critical thinker and to know a lot of different knowledge and facts. Go ahead and tell those stories. This is also the area that'll be evaluated within the written exercises and within the multiple choice test as well, both of which have resources online that'll help you study for those exams. And then the hot topic areas as well are something that you really should know for this area to show that you have a good depth and breadth of knowledge in several different agricultural areas.
And a quick side note in relation to this, none of those 3 areas are more important than the others. We weigh each of them with points equally. So don't think that, you need to memorize that FFA manual and regurgitate it, and that's going to get you the most points. At the end of the day, FFA state officers are advocates for agriculture, FFA, and ag ed. And it's really important that as a state officer, you're fluent and knowledgeable in all of those areas. So we test it that way. So we'll get into a little bit deeper as far as where to look and become more familiar with those areas, but just be as familiar as you can with each of those to really set yourself up for success in the interview rounds.
The next round, next knowledge competency area is character. Character is, who you are when other people aren't looking, right? So how much are you genuine? Are you responsible? Are you honest? Do you show maturity? Are you confident? All those different superlatives that we talk about and think about when it comes to character, those are all going to be evaluated throughout the entire process. It'll really allow you to kind of showcase who you are, what makes you you, and what are the best characteristics that you have to bring forward to a team. Not a whole lot else to say about character, really. The next one is influence. Influence is also worth 20%. Influence is kind of revolves around, are you setting a good example for younger members within your chapter? Are you mentoring other people? How well do you represent FFA? It's a kind of just how we talk about leadership being influence. That's kind of where this boils down to. A lot of the skills within influence kind of boil down to how well you lead within whatever organization you're a part of, and those personal attributes that we kind of think about when we think about great leaders within society, within our chapters, within whatever.
Awesome. So we covered those 5 competencies that we're going to be scored on throughout interviews. And now we're going to dive in a little bit more into what each of the interview rounds looks like. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Personal round 1. You'll have 6 minutes. It'll be you and the entire nominating committee. The nominating committee is comprised of 12 FFA members from across the state. There's 2 from each district, so each district is equally represented. They're current high school students. They're just like you and I. They just want to get to know you in all of the rounds, honestly. But it'll be 1 on 12. That's what we mean is it's just you and that nominating committee, the whole committee. And you'll get about 3 to 5 questions within that time frame of 6 minutes. So the purpose for this one is just to get to know you, get to know your goals, your motivations, why it is you want to be a state officer. As you round up in your time and prep for interviews, that why factor of like why you want to do this is super critical to really just be familiar with yourself, because that's going to be the backbone of all your answers, right? You're there for a reason. Be really familiar with why you're doing this and why you're running for state office. And that'll definitely help you out a little bit in those interviews. That tip there, just make your first impression a good one and be sure to practice those interview questions. There are some questions within those resources online. So go ahead and just look through those, get your stories ready, just become familiar with what they're going to ask you about, and how your answers are going to line up with those 5 competencies that we just talked about. But your first round is that first personal round, 1 on 12 with that committee of members. Second round, if we go to the next slide, is multiple choice test. For some reason, this freaks everyone out. It's really not that big of a deal, especially this year. I think we have really set up candidates for success in this area. You'll have 30 minutes to answer a 30-question test that will cover FFA, Ag Ed, and the agriculture industry. Again, all three of those are super important. So basically just seeing what you know. The cool thing this year that's new is there is a resource exam guide online on that state officer's selection process page we keep mentioning. All of those 101 facts, all of the 30 questions that we pull on that quiz will be from that sheet. So if you're familiar with those facts, that quiz will be easy for you. So just become familiar with those facts that are on there. Again, that covers all three of those areas that we talked about in areas of knowledge. And that'll really set you up for success there. So that is the multiple choice test, pretty painless. Again, any questions, please send them in. We want to know what you guys are wondering so we can make sure you guys are set up for success when it comes to rounds.
I will say on the multiple choice test as well, so out of the 30 questions, 10 will be in the area of FFA, 10 will be in the area of agricultural education, and 10 will be in the area of agriculture. So like Elissa said, everything's going to be weighted the same out of that exam so that it'll be a true representation of the complete knowledge that you possess.
So the next slide actually references that exam resource guide, and it gives you that link to it as well. So just go ahead and follow that. Within that state officer candidate workbook, that handbook that we keep mentioning, if you go to page 10, there is a whole page of websites and sources to get in contact with, to become familiar with, in reference to preparing not only for the exam, but for your stand and deliver, for your round robins, just to be all ready in all those aspects. Some of the big ones for the ag education, the National Association of Ag Educators is a really great website. That's basically the group that your ag teacher belongs to, and is just a professional development group for them. They have a lot of great resources as far as number of ag teachers, that teacher shortage we always hear about, right? The Council for Agricultural Education has a lot of really great stuff, as well as anything about career and technical ed. So career and technical education is the umbrella that Ag Ed sits under. So that includes CTE, includes your industrial tech, your FCS, that sort of stuff. So it's really important, especially for some of the hot topics this year, to know about CTE. So become familiar with that as well. Agriculture, Iowa Ag Facts from Iowa Farm Bureau, Coalition to Support Iowa's Farmers have a lot of great stuff. National Farm Bureau has some great resources as well. Just dig around and just become familiar with what's going on in the industry right now. Finally, with FFA, our website, National FFA's website, the manual, anything in maybe like New Horizons, there might be some good stuff in there that you guys all have access to. But definitely spend time in each of those areas, again, because they're all very important when it comes to that areas of knowledge competency that we talked about. Next slide is round 3, the writing exercise. You will receive a prompt, and you'll have 45 minutes to write for that prompt. So it might be a newspaper article, it might be an editorial, it might be a blog, something that a state officer could very easily be asked to do within their year of service to write about. And it will cover one of the, it'll cover all the hot topics. Yeah, or all the hot topic areas. Yes, that's new this year. It'll cover all the hot topic areas, or all the areas of knowledge. Rewind. It'll cover all the areas of knowledge. So somehow within that writing exercise, you will have the chance to write about FFA, to write about Ag Ed, and to write about agriculture and how they intertwine. So just, again, become familiar with all those things and it'll be easier for you. This does take place in a computer lab, so you don't have to write it, which is great. You get to do it on a computer. There's no resources for this. It is only a blank Word doc that you get to access. So come in with everything locked and loaded in your brain, and then you'll have 45 minutes, like we said, to write that out. And then we print those and send them in for scoring.
One thing we'll mention at this point is that, like, for the writing exercise, the stand and deliver round, and just those two. Right?
Robin? I don't know what you're thinking.
What I'm thinking of is for the stand and deliver round and for the writing exercise, it's not the nominating committee that is scoring. those rounds. So for your stand and deliver round, that is scored by a panel, and we'll talk about that more when we get to that point. But for the stand and deliver round, is scored by a panel of industry experts. And then for the writing exercise, that is also scored by an outside adult that is a editor of a newspaper or a magazine, so that they're knowledgeable in how writing should be done, and then also knowledgeable in kind of the facts and resources that you could reference within your paper as well. So just a heads up for that. The nominating committee isn't going to be scoring every single round, but they will be scoring a majority of the rounds.
Yeah. So another thing with that writing exercise, obviously we want you to know what you're talking about, but we want you to also be good with grammar and writing mechanics and all that sort of stuff. So if that's something that you struggle with, go talk to your English teacher at your high school, sit down with your newspaper or something, connect with someone that's really good at writing and have them help you with that. This is a really good one where like you just have to practice it to really become good at it, at that speed writing, but still, you know, using intro, body, conclusion thing that we learned in English, right? So just another thing to keep in mind, that part of that score will come from those writing mechanics on that side of things, as well as your knowledge on the areas that we ask you about. So round 4 is our one-on-ones. This is basically a speed dating round. You get 3 minutes with each nominating committee member one-on-one, where they will ask you between 2 and 3 questions. It's literally a circle of chairs and you just bounce from chair to chair. It's a speed dating round. It's a really great opportunity for you to have that one-on-one time with each of those nominating committee members. So they're going to be asking you questions again on those competencies, on those targeted traits that we talked about. And it, a really great way to practice for this one is to, again, just do it like you would at interviews, to sit down, get a group of 3 or 4 people and just bounce between them and practice answering behavioral-based interview questions, because that's what it's going to be. Yeah, you'll have 12 interviews, right? Because there's 12 of those nominating committee members, 2-3 questions each, 3 minutes each, and then you just bounce between. So pretty self-explanatory there. Round 5 is round robin. So this is a new round. We'll do our best to make sure that, you know, all the confusion, all the muddy water around this is cleared up as best as we can going into interviews. This round basically evaluates your ability to have a conversation, because we know that with state office, with that position, you just interact with a bunch of people, whether it's FFA members, whether it's advisors, whether it's industry personnel, people within education, administration within schools, you know, whatever it is, you have so many different conversations that you are asked to, you know, have and do well and know your areas of knowledge, right? So that's what this is going to be evaluating. You will receive a prompt in the hallway. You'll have 2 minutes to kind of get yourself ready with that prompt. That prompt will give you who you're talking to, where you're at, and what you're going to be talking to them about. Again, if you access those notes from the state officer candidate workshop, there's a mock prompt in there from the round robin round, where you're talking to someone from the National Teach Ag campaign about the teacher shortage for ag ed. And you'll have 5 minutes to have that conversation with an industry person. Nominating committee will be scoring this round, but you will be having a conversation with an industry person that is very obviously in touch with whatever it is that you're talking to them about. So if it's, if we're hitting on the area of American agriculture, we're going to have someone in there that's been working in the industry that's familiar with the hot topic that we're hitting on. So again, be familiar with those, that area of knowledge competency, because if you pull something out of your butt, they're going to be able to know, and they can tell the nominating committee that that maybe something that you said wasn't quite correct. It's not a speech round. This is about your ability to have a conversation. We can't stress that enough. We put this in here because we believe that a state officer's ability to have a conversation is just as important as it is for them to be able to get up and speak in front of people. So don't neglect preparation for this round either. Just go, again, Practice it like you would when you were at the interview round. Just have those conversations with people. Find the balance between you talking and them talking. You don't want to control the conversation, and you don't want them to be the only one talking. So find that middle ground there too. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I got a question in via text asking about citing of sources throughout the process, particularly in the writing exercise. This is a great question. So we want you to be able to say where your information came from, but as far as like a formal citation of a source, that's definitely not necessary. So like if you have a fact that came from the American Farm Bureau, something as simple as saying, according to the American Farm Bureau, such and such. Whether that's in your writing exercise, whether that's in a speech you're giving, even if that's within like the round robin round. If there's a fact that you learned while studying for the exam that you think could be pertained to the conversation that you're having, if you want to just say like, yeah, according to the Farm Bureau, like Farm Bureau says this, that's definitely a very viable thing. So not a full citation, but we definitely want you to have a credible cite in mind when you're answering those questions and using facts to do so.
I have another question too. This is a good one. They asked, will any members of the nominating committee be from the same chapter as any of the candidates running? No, that's not allowed. That's against the rules. There is no one on the nominating committee that will be from the same chapter as a candidate, just for preventing conflict of interest, right? Now, with that said, there will probably be people on the committee that you know or recognize because you all are so involved in FFA at the local district state level that don't be freaked out if you walk into that room and see some familiar faces. Don't be freaked out if you walk into the room and don't know anybody, because that's fine too. You're going to have a mix of both. But no one from the nominating committee will be from the chapter of any of the candidates. Good question. We will move on to round 6. Like I said, with round robin, we really want to make sure that you guys are very okay with what's going on. Just have a good feeling about that. So please send in any questions that you have about that or anything we've talked about so far. Round 6, stand and deliver. Something else people get really freaked out about, but it's not that bad. It's a 3-minute speech. This is another one of those rounds that we just talked about that isn't scored by the nominating committee. It's scored by a panel of industry experts. So if your stand and deliver is about the hot topic, one of the hot topics in agricultural education, there's going to be a panel of people that are very familiar or probably work within ag ed at multiple different levels. If it's ag, it's going to be industry people. If it's FFA, it's going to be FFA people. Makes sense. But it'll be scored by them. It'll probably be anywhere between 3 and 5 people that'll be scoring you. So like I said, 3-minute speech, 20 minutes to prepare. You'll walk into the prep room. You'll be given a prompt, kind of like you did with round robin. And in that prompt, it'll tell you who you're talking to and what you're talking to them about. That'll kind of give you some guidelines on what your speech should be about and some construction there. You'll have 20 minutes to prep. Again, no resources coming into this room. You will be given pens and paper to write out your speech if that's how you like to prep. You cannot take anything into the delivery room with you. Cannot stress that enough. You can't take anything into the room with you. It's just you. So prep and prep and prep as much as you need to in that 20 minutes. Become familiar with that speech and be ready to give it with nothing in your hands, because that's how we do it. Again, 3 minutes to speak. You'll be given a time warning. At 3 minutes, you'll stop. And then there'll be 5 minutes for questions afterwards from that panel. There'll probably be a mix of questions just about that topic area and then about your speech specifically. So just be prepared for that as well. Again, 5 minutes for those questions. Yeah, just basically evaluates how you can speak in front of people. Again, we're testing that communication competency as well as that areas of knowledge competency as well. So again, another one, you just kind of, the more you practice it, the more comfortable you become, and the better you'll probably do when you get into that interview room. Anything on stand and deliver tips or tricks? No. You can't take anything into the room with you. Yeah. We had people freak out last year because they didn't understand that. yeah, just make sure you get that. Do you have a question?
Oh yeah, a question came up. So, is there time in between the rounds, or will they be one after another? That's a great question. Basically, how interviews will end up working is that you're split into two different groups. So there'll be a group A, there'll be a group B. And how that kind of works is that while let's say group A starts in personal round 1, while they're doing personal round 1, group B will be doing something else within the process. So that's kind of how we keep logistically, how we keep a lot of things moving with the process. So like the writing exercise doesn't take the nominating committee to do. So like while personal round 1's happening, group B is doing the writing exercise, and then group A and group B will flip. And do the other thing. So between rounds pretty much run back to back. The only time that that's not the case is like when lunch happens or something like that, that there'd be a break. But the thing is that even though those rounds are back to back, there's still a natural break there because you won't be like, you'll get done with an interview round and you won't be the first person, most likely won't be the first person up in the next interview round. That happens. So although the round itself is back to back, you won't be in the room back to back, if that kind of makes sense. So you'll naturally have time throughout the process that will be kind of downtime for you to do whatever you need to do. We will say that in like some of the holding rooms, I mean, people have had books that they needed to get read for an English class, or they've had a paper that they need to finish or something. Those are all acceptable things to do. Or if you just need to take some time for yourself and kind of chill out for a while, that's cool too. So you won't be constantly going all the time. It's kind of the hurry up and wait game, where you're getting done with a round and then you want to start that next round, but you're gonna have to wait until that next round kind of starts and gets going and gets to be your turn.
Also, be prepared to not always have access to your cell phones, strictly because, like what Tup just talked about, half of the candidates are going to be going through one round and half the candidates are going to be going through something else. So we don't want communication to happen between those two groups in someone's favor and someone's disfavor through cell phones. You'll get more information on that and just how we're going to monitor that once we get actually to interviews, but just be prepared for that as well. Round 7, the last one, is your last personal round, your second personal round. Again, 1 on 12. You have 8 minutes with the committee at this point. They'll have 3 to 5 questions for you. This is really focused on your character, your ability to influence, your passion for the FFA, your passion for success. This is kind of your last chance to tell them anything that you want them to know about you. Through those stories that we mentioned, through those behavioral-based interview questions that'll be used all throughout interviews. Yeah, last shot with them. 8 minutes, 3 to 5 questions. Pretty self-explanatory. Hot topics, that's the next slide, the 2018 hot topics. Like we said, there's hot topics. This is new this year. There's hot topics within each area. Not that it matters, but in the past, we've rotated through those 3. But we decided to make the change to evaluate those 3 each year, again, because you're going to be asked and you're going to be held to the point to be knowledgeable on each of those every year. So within the American agriculture hot topic, we have the role agriculture plays in conservation and sustainability. We all know that this is a hot topic in ag right now, and something that a lot of people have been talking about and working on. So definitely be familiar with some of those practices on what's going on with sustainability and conservation, not only in Iowa, but in the United States as well. And then the second one for that is bridging the gap between producers and consumers. If you have a question on that, shoot us a text. It's pretty simple. We all know that that disconnect exists. How are we going to do a better job of making our consumers aware of what agriculture is, what us as agriculturalists do, what our practices are, all that sort of stuff. Agricultural education. The first one is recent changes in SAE structure and importance of work-based learning. There has been a recent rollout of some new SAE structures, or SAE structure, I should say, it's one thing, as far as what a project can look like and how an SAE starts. talk to your ag teacher about this. They're probably aware of what's going on, and they can hook you up with some of the resources. The best resource for this is on the Council of Ag Ed's website, which is through National FFA. They have, it's like a 70-page document on what SAEs can be, what the content areas are, all that sort of stuff. On the flip side of that, that work-based learning aspect is really big in career and technical education world. So another thing to talk to your ag teacher about is that work-based learning and how that's important in ag ed and just education in general. Second one there is describe the relationship between Perkins funding, career and technical education, and the STEM initiative. This one's heavy as far as like just the structure of it. So what is Perkins funding? You'll find out a lot of that through like the Association of Career and Technical Education, ACTE, Career and Technical Education. What is it? What exists inside of that? What are career and technical student organizations, i.e. FFA, i.e. FCCLA, DECA, all that sort of stuff. And then how does that relate to STEM? STEM is a huge buzzword right now, not only in CTE, but just in education in general. Iowa actually has a really great like STEM initiative right here. So with Governor Reynolds, so get familiar with that. And then as well as the national scale too. FFA, changing demographics of members and its impact. We know that we are constantly changing and updating along with the face of agriculture. So just be familiar with what FFA is becoming, who its membership is, how that's impacting the organization and its supporters and its members. National FFA would be a good resource there, but be sure to dig into that one. And then finally, the importance of leadership development through FFA for the workforce. So career and technical education gets people ready for the workforce, right? We often stress the importance of four-year universities, but we know that that's not built for everyone. So really taking that focus of what do we learn in FFA, what do we learn in agricultural education, and how that creates readiness for people to go into their careers. That's what career and technical education is all about. So just be very familiar with how we can, how within FFA we get ready for students entering that workforce right after graduation, 2 years after graduation, 4, whatever it is. How do we do that? I've had a hard time finding statistics for the topic of importance of leadership development through FFA for the workforce. What types of facts would we want for this? I guess this is just a tidbit for all of the hot topics and when we evaluate your areas of knowledge. Statistics aren't always numbers, and your areas of knowledge isn't always going to be evaluated on your ability to spew out numbers. What's your familiarity with that area? Talk about career development events. How does that get students ready for the workforce? Talk about supervised agricultural experience. How does that get students ready for the workforce? Think more broad when it comes to these hot topics. Yes, we want numbers. We want cold hard facts, right? That's what makes the world go round. But we also want you to be familiar with just the issue in general and what are some things that are being done to help solve that problem. What are some programs in place? As far as statistics, what's the membership in Iowa? What's the membership in National FFA? Okay, that X amount of members are getting workforce prep because of XYZ. So that's one way to think of it.
Another thing that you could think about doing is going to like the National FFA Foundation website, or even just National FFA in general. They probably have some statistics on like how many employees within certain companies might have been involved in FFA, or just testimonial from certain companies about what FFA does in order to prepare students for their workforce. And those kind of things are kind of more what we're looking for there, is that testimonial type value that says this career development event really kind of prepares people for the workforce. One of the best ones I can think of to kind of give you an example is Governor Branstad had, when he was governor, talked about how FFA teaches parliamentary procedure and how important that can be in the business world. So it's those types of things. I hope that helps kind of answer that question a little bit, but testimonial can be just as good as kind kind of cold hard, a number fact can be, like Elissa said.
Yeah, those firsthand accounts of impact through programs is, pretty powerful too. It could be your testimonial or someone else's that you've seen in your community, in your chapter, whatever it is. So yeah, those are those hot topics. Again, you'll be tested on all 3 of those areas, but the specific hot topics will only come up a couple of times within interviews. Your 2 round robin. So round robin happens twice. And then your stand and deliver. I realized that I didn't tell you this round robin happened twice. You'll have 2 different conversations, 2 different prompts with 2 different industry professionals. You'll be quizzed on 2 different hot topics there. So I hope that kind of clears it up as well. Keep sending us questions. We like them.
All right. So now that we get to really slide 25, so this is kind of the breakdown of how you are elected to state office. So 60% of what your final score is, if you're put on the ballot, is based upon your nominating committee score. So the points that you accumulate throughout this interview process will account for a weighted percentage of 60% at state convention. The remaining 40% is a formula based upon the amount of votes that you then receive at state convention. So I was unique in this way. I'm from a lot of other states. A lot of other states are either completely based on the nominating committee or completely based on voting. We think that there's value in both. Having the nominating committee that knows you more intimately because you've now spent 2 days with them, telling them who you are as a person and why you want to be a state officer. We think there's a lot of value in that, which is why we weight that slightly higher. But obviously the delegate body is important. You're representing FFA members from across the state of Iowa, across your district, if you're elected as a vice president. So anything that you are, sorry, I completely lost my train of thought there for a second, but basically what this boils down to is that both matter, but the nominating committee is slightly weighted more, but at state convention, it's still important to give a good speech, answer questions well, and really show who you are in the short period of time that you have to those delegates at convention, so that they can make an informed decision on who they want to vote for.
Think of a question, send it in. While you're thinking of that question and sending it in, one thing we'll quick mention, just to give a little insight more on what happens at state convention. I know we had the steps earlier in the PowerPoint slide, but the ballot gets announced very end, pretty much of business session. Depending on the position that you get balloted for, depends on where you give your speech. So if you get balloted for reporter or secretary, those are our at-large positions. You will be giving your speech on stage to the entire delegate body. You will have a microphone. You will be on stage, on spotlights, all that great stuff. On the flip side, if you get balloted for a vice president position, you will be around the upper bowl of Hilton Coliseum. You will not have a microphone, and it will just be the delegates from your district. So you could be speaking to a group of over 400 delegates, or you could be speaking to a group of the 80 delegates. So just be prepared for either or when you are practicing your speech. Practice with the mic, practice without it. Also practice projecting your voice, because Hilton gets very loud. And if you do get balloted for a vice president position, you will want to be able to project your voice to that group that you're talking to. After your speech and the candidate that you're balloted against, their speech, you'll be asked 2 questions. You'll alternate who answers first, who answers second. You'll alternate there, and you'll have a minute per question.
Yes.
Yes. We'll double check on that, but a minute per question to answer to that delegate body. And then, minute per question to answer that delegate body. And you'll be able to hear the other candidates' answers. You will not hear the other candidates' speech. So I don't know why you would want to, but you can't. But just as an overview, Secretary reporter on stage with the mic, VP's upper bowl to your own district delegates, no mic, 2 questions, 1 minute per question. That's kind of what state convention looks like if you do get balloted. Had a question about having a speech created for the business session in case you get balloted. Probably a good idea. If you're like Tupper and are really great at extemporaneous speaking and you feel comfortable with that, go for it. But if you're like me, that's not a thing. Definitely have a speech ready, and have some practice under your belt too with answering more questions to a group of people that are actually listening. You know, a whole audience that are going to be listening to you. But yeah, probably not a bad idea to come with a speech ready.
Yeah. Cole, I see your question too. We'll get to that one here in a sec. Before going into certain rounds, will we be in a holding room? Yes, you will be. So the question goes on to ask, for example, before going to the 12-on-1 interview, will you be in a holding room waiting for your turn or in another round? You'll be. So when you get done with a round, there will be. Most of the time, the holding rooms are if there's 2 rounds going at the same time, the holding rooms can be, especially for like the exam or whatever, like we'll try and keep the 2 groups separate most of the time. Sometimes they'll be together, especially if it's like after you've both completed the round, then we can put you into the same holding room at that point. But no, you'll get done with a round and it might be fairly quickly by the time you start the next round, but you'll be put into a holding room for that particular round, at least for a little while before that next round starts, if that kind of makes sense. So there'll be holding rooms for that round. The holding rooms will be kind of transitioned around from group A to group B, and then that round will be completed.
We got another question. If I didn't put that I wanted to run for state secretary as my first option, how do I let the nominating committee know that I'd like to be considered as state secretary? So basically just talking about the preference of offices. I wouldn't worry about it. They don't spend a lot of time making sure that people's preferences are met. If they want you on the team, they're going to put you in a spot that will hopefully get you on the team. What you put on your application isn't make or break. They look at it, but it's not the final detail of whether or not you will get balloted as the opportunity to be a state officer. I don't know if there's really anything else to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, they might take it as a recommendation, but it's definitely not the end all be all.
Yeah.
They're the ones that have seen your skill sets. They're going to put you where they believe that you're going to be the most successful, and where you're going to help the team the most.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think that things would have worked themselves out the way they were meant to be, whether or not you had indicated your first preference in the correct manner or not.
Yeah. End of the story. Just don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It'll be fine. Do you have another one?
Another question? I do not believe so.
Okay. Cole, we'll answer your question now. It talks about how we work towards state office when we were in our positions. What tips or tricks worked for you? I'm guessing as far as just preparation for interviews.
Well, I know that, so Elissa and I actually went to the same high school. So when we ran for state office, it would have been in 2014, we had an we actually did like a mock interview night. So we had,
I forgot about that.
3 different panels of people that we went through and practiced kind of one-on-one type questions and 1-on-12 type questions. So one was a panel of like 3 adults, one was a panel of students, and then I think the last one was like a panel of teachers or something that we had at our school. So that was a really great thing for us to be able to set up, because the best way to kind of practice these rounds is to actually practice them out loud. Practicing one-on-ones, honestly, grab a friend and find some of the questions that we provided to you and some of the resources and just have them ask you, and get comfortable with answering. And then just kind of have the friend tell you whether they felt that you portrayed. Ask them, the best way to do it is to ask them what they got from your stories, what they got from your answer. Because if that's not the message that you were trying to get across, then you need to retweak how you go about saying that story, saying that message, so that you're making sure you're conveying the point you want accurately. Really, for any of these interview rounds, it all comes down to just practicing exactly how you would once you get to Ankeny, once you get to the real deal and wanting to practice there. The more you can practice, the better and the more comfortable you're going to feel with not only answering the questions, but also the timing of the questions, because you are given a short period of time to get some of these answers done. And you could have a really great story, but if it takes 4 minutes to tell that story, you need to find either a different way to tell it, or you need to pick a different story, because you're going to really run out of time in your ability to tell the nominating committee everything that you want to tell them, because you spent too much time on one thing.
Yeah, I got cut off once. That was
I did too.
Awkward.
And like, I remember the one-on-one. I think my first go around, I'd answered, there was at least, it might have been 3 questions. I think I was getting close to finishing number 2, and got cut off. And I was like, awesome. But which happens, and that's not the end of the world either. Don't let it freak you obviously out. Because both of us ended up being state officers. But don't let that happen a whole bunch either. So
don't make that your goal.
Yeah, no. But yeah, it really just comes down to practicing exactly how we've kind of talked about how the rounds are going to operate here tonight. And if you practice like that for the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think you're going to feel really comfortable with the way we do things at Ankeny.
Yeah. He had more of like a logistical approach to preparation. I'll take more of like a personal growth, self-reflection approach to preparation. And he's heard this multiple times, and some of you guys have heard this before, so sorry if it's a repeat. But the first time I ran, I actually didn't get elected, and I know why. Hindsight's 2020, right? Because when I was prepping the first time, everything that I was preparing for answers was what I thought the nominating committee wanted to hear. And clearly didn't work out how I wanted it to. So when I decided to run again, I took a step back and really focused more on, okay, why am I so into this thing? Why am I deciding that after a year of college, I still want to be in that blue corporate jacket? Like, why is it so important to me? And once I became familiar with that, again, that why FFA thing, it kind of makes coming up with your answers pretty easy. Again, we want that diversity outside of FFA, but at the end of the day, you're going to put on that blue jacket, and that has to be, something that you're passionate about, something that drives you. So a tip that I would give, and I've given this to multiple candidates that I've talked to in the past couple of years, is be familiar and be comfortable with who you are. First and foremost, you have got to be confident in who you are, be able to rock it as soon as you walk into that room and say, this is who I am. This is what I bring to the table, and here's my experiences. And just share who you are, because that's who they want to get to know. They don't want to get to know who you think they want to hear you are. It's a long answer, but show them who you are. Don't feed them what you think they want to hear. On the same realm, figure out what you're good at. Figure out what your strengths are. Figure out what you're passionate about specifically. I'm passionate about FFA. That's great. But why? Like, what within FFA makes you passionate about it? Figure out what your values are. What you value in a relationship, in a team that you've been on, or whatever. Figure out that. Just really become comfortable and aware of who you are, what you bring to the table, what you value. And when you get into the interview room, you can prep and go through mock interviews as much as you want. But that moment that a question that gets thrown in your face that trips you up, it's going to take you back a second. And it happened to me in my president interview. I had to sit there and was like, oh, okay, let me think about this. And when you are more aware of who you are and everything that encompasses you, coming up with an answer for that question that caught you off guard is going to be so much easier than trying to think, okay, well, they asked me this, what do they want to hear? Because that's not going to work. So along with, you got to practice, you really have to. You have to really be comfortable getting into situations where people are asking you questions and the eyes are on you. But just as equally as important, you've got to know who you are, why you want this, and what it is that you bring to the table as a state officer candidate. Long answer, but hopefully it helped some of you out at some point in this preparation journey. Final call for questions. We'll talk about just a few more things and then we'll wrap up. We don't want to take any more of your guys' time. But any final questions, please send them in. We want to help you guys out as much as possible. If you go to the contact info slide, it's number 27, second to last. That's all of our contact information. Don't hesitate to shoot us an email, a text message, give us a call. If there's anything that is still confusing you about the process, please know that like we want to help you, but there's certain things that we can't answer. And if that's the case, we'll let you know, but just don't like get freaked out if we don't answer your question, because there is some things that we just can't share. But Brandon Hanson has also been a really big person in this revision process. He just wasn't able to make it tonight. If you're familiar with him, have a good relationship with him, please like contact him as well. He'll be more than willing to help you out too. Tup and I are always available. So don't hesitate at all to reach out with anything that you have questions on. And finally, thanks for attending the webinar. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Thanks for sticking with us. This will be on the YouTube page. So if some point during prep you remember something that we said but can't remember it fully, this will be up online on the IOFA YouTube page. Just feel free to access it there too, as you need. And we will send an updated PowerPoint with the right percentages. Yep. We'll send it out to you all, and then it'll get posted on the website as well, with the link to this video.
But if there aren't any further questions, then I'm not seeing any on my phone either. We thank you for attending. We're looking forward to seeing and meeting all of you a little bit more once Ankeny rolls around. Elissa, myself, Brandon, Hanson, and a few others will kind of be running the process in Ankeny as the student/adult coordinators. I mean, I'm 22 years old, but I think I'm still a student coordinator. I'm not really sure. But we do look forward to seeing all of you, answering your questions, and trying to make you feel as comfortable with this process as we can. And if there's nothing else, we're going to go ahead and end this live stream.
I picked Nova for whoever just texted me and asked. Villanova. It's on the record.
I think I actually normally don't.
Killed Kansas.
I normally don't agree with Elissa, but I'm probably gonna have to pick Nova too. So
this is just great.
Which means Michigan will end up winning, because I haven't picked a single game right all the time. But
thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you all, and thank you for working with us through the technical difficulties. We will see you all in a couple weeks.
Bye.